you stand on that. That's okay. It's okay. They're just too close. Oh, too close. Okay. They're only playing at the beginning and the end. So oh, okay.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if we should wait a couple more minutes. I think we're expecting a few more people. But now you're all allowed to be standing. Who's in front here? Well, hey, before we get started, let's have everyone introduce. You're going to say your name, what school and grade, and what your school is.
Hi, I'm Eve. I'm a sophomore at Hamilton High School, and I play violin.
Hi, I'm Burton. I'm a senior at Campo Verde High School, and I play violin.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm a sophomore at Asta High School, and I also play the violin.
I'm Brixton. I'm a senior at Mason High, and I play violin.
I'm Emma. I'm a senior at Hamilton High School, and I play the cello.
I'm Kat. I'm a senior at Mesquite High School, and I play viola.
I'm Iman. I'm a senior at Campo Verde High School, and I play the violin.
I'm Joe. I'm a sophomore at Clinton High, and I play the violin.
I'm Jacob. I'm a sophomore at Gilbert High School, and I play viola.
I'm Jacob. I'm a sophomore at Campo Verde High School, and I play the viola.
I'm Claire. I'm a sophomore at Mountain View, and I play the violin.
I'm Aubrey. I'm a sophomore at Asta High School, and I play the cello.
I'm Joseph. I'm a sophomore at Mountain View, and I play the violin.
I'm Bree. I'm a senior at Asta High School, and I play the violin.
I'm Miguel. I'm a junior at Mesquite, and I play the violin.
I'm Rachel. I'm a sophomore at Clinton, and I play the violin.
Okay, we'll have to move this to get everybody in. I don't think so. I think it's straight. Miguel, will you turn on the lights for the performance part? Who's the last one? Do I have Jacob? Oh, Jacob, raise your hand. Oh, good, you're okay. Okay. Maybe scoot in a little more. See. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started.
So today.
I'll introduce you.
Oh, okay.
Welcome. I am Sarah Goose, one of the co-directors of this group, the Gilbertown Fiddlers, and we are so excited to have been selected to present at the National String Teachers Association Conference, which is happening next month in Albuquerque. And so we wanted to bring you here so that these students could practice their presentation and to let you know what we're planning to do. The title of our session is called Fostering Contemporary Musicians, and it's creativity through student-led arranging, which is what our group is about. We're going to start off the session with them playing, and then I'll explain a little bit more about it.
So today we're playing Big Coyote and Jimmy in the Swamp, which are two old-time American tunes.
Okay, so at this point, Taylor and I will be introducing the session and the students in the group and kind of what we do. Unfortunately, Taylor is sick today and couldn't be here. But we wanted to not do our part anyway because, let's face it, we're here to see and to hear what they have to say. And plus, most of you, many of you are familiar with the group already and the kind of work we do. So, we have 4 topics that we're going to be doing here today. And I should mention that we have 3 students who are unable to join us in Albuquerque. And so they have put together this slideshow. Now we'll turn these on. And Selena, Bree, and Iman are the ones who did the slideshow and will continue to do so. We would like you to know that this is still a work in progress. Both the presenting and the slides, and many changes will probably take place as far as polishing things over the next couple of weeks before we head to New Mexico. But we did want to share it with you, and so the topics that, well, let me tell you how we got to these topics. Taylor and I decided that with a title like we had about contemporary musicians and student-led arranging, that it was fitting that the students, the contemporary musicians, were the ones who were presenting about how they learned and how they do the arranging process, since that's what our group is about. And we think that teachers will love to hear that too. So the students came up with the 4 things that they thought were most important, I think, to share with teachers. And these are the 4 that they decided upon. And then they broke into small groups and they came up with what they were going to present. And so those topics are communication, comping, improvisation, and arranging. So we'll let each group do their presentation, and then we'll take a few minutes for some questions. So we are planning to do that at the conference also to allow the audience and the teachers in the audience to ask questions. So if you have questions, please put us on the spot today so we can practice answering these questions. Do you have any questions? Okay. All right, communication, come on up. Wait for me.
Hey guys, what do you see on this screen?
I don't know, it just looks like a white screen to me.
Really? You see a white screen? You know, personally, when I look at this, I see an opportunity, okay? I see passion.
It's a blank screen. Okay, I was going somewhere with communication. Obviously, you guys wouldn't understand what I'm trying to communicate if I just left a blank screen up there. Communication is vital to Gilbertown Fiddlers. Without communication, we would not be able to give ideas, we wouldn't be able to arrange. It allows a basis for us to arrange, improv, and accompany. And that is how we play the music that we just did.
So to do that, we need to be able to connect with each other on both a social and personal level, because the more you know your peers socially, the better you can work together professionally. One thing that we often talk about is how when we're just talking to each other, we feel weird when we're not holding our instruments, because we're so used to being in a music-making environment together. And that's something that we're constantly working to fight against so that we can communicate better as a group. And so one thing that we do at the beginning of every rehearsal is what we like to call a check-in.
A check-in is just like a little short way to get to know the people around you and to get to know your peers better. It makes you more comfortable around each other and it lets you communicate more.
So when we're doing these check-ins, typically what we do is we go around in a big circle and then we say our name, our grade, our school, and our instrument. And usually there's also a final question that we ask that changes per week basis.
So today we want you to say your name, where you're from, what do you teach, your instrument, and what's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
Yeah, so go ahead and take a minute and turn to the neighbors around you and do a check-in.
Hi. Okay, I'm Sarah and I teach 7th and 8th grade. And my favorite ice
Alright, so let's wrap that up. Alright, so now you already know a little bit more about the person you're sitting next to, and in a future time you would be able to work with them better, because it's kind of a proven fact that if you like someone, then you tend to work well with them. And that's why in GTF we always like to do a check-in to warm up to each other, and then we know how everyone's feeling, and we can work together.
So really what this all boils down to is, what you're doing here is the process of humanization. So what you're really trying to do here is you're trying to connect to another person on a more personal and social level. Because typically in these music environments, there is some sort of disconnect or boundary that you're trying to get your ideas across to another person that you're actually unable to because you don't know the person as well. So what we do in GTF with these events and these practices is we're really trying to get to know each other on a different kind of level so we can better communicate these ideas. And so when you take these ideas into a music environment, you can more apply these to your students or anywhere else really when you're trying to create an arrangement by expressing your ideas in a better format because you have the knowledge of the other person.
So one tool that we can use to well, this is the most basic tool that exists for communication. It's so fundamentally important. It's just one word. We use it every single day. You want to know what the word is? It's respect. Y'all. Yeah, the thing we use the most often is respecting each other. It's fundamental to communication. So one way we can implement respect towards each other is by utilizing the 1/n rule. So imagine there are a bunch of people in a room, not that hard, right? And people are trying to communicate with each other, trying to talk to each other. How much should you be contributing to any discussion? Well, let's say there are 4 people in a room, and we're doing something creative like arranging a tune, and I want to know how much I should contribute to that arrangement. Well, we can utilize the 1/n rule that says you should use 1 out of 4, or however many people are in the room, amount of air. So I should probably only talk a quarter of the time. It's sort of like a pie, right? When you're sitting with a group of friends and you're eating a pie, you don't want to have like 90% of the pie because that would be unfair to the other people around. They want to have their pie too. So I should only use a quarter of the pie, or 1/4 amount of pie.
And and you can do whatever you want with your slice of pie, if that be contribute ideas or if you'd rather listen to someone else's ideas. But it's your choice on if you want to speak or if you would rather have someone else speak.
Okay, well I think you guys have taken up too much pie. So another thing that we like to use is a bias called the fundamental attribution error. And this is something that we kind of have in our minds that is something that we're kind of born with. And it's how when you make a mistake personally, you never really blame yourself. But if someone else makes a mistake, you always tend to blame them. We as humans tend to judge others on their actions, but we judge ourselves on our intentions. So for example, if someone's late to rehearsal...
Eve, okay, there was traffic that day. That's why she was late.
Exactly. So my intention was to be to rehearsal on time, but there was traffic and I had to let the dog out and there were so many other things that I needed to do. However, if someone else showed up late to rehearsal, I would probably blame them right off the bat for not taking responsibility for their actions. However, by doing that, I'm not taking accountability for my own thoughts. So one thing that we do in GTF is we're always trying to fight this bias known as the fundamental attribution error, because it's not very conducive to working together in a creative environment or really any type of professional environment. So we always want to try and break down that barrier and see each other and try to understand where everyone is coming from.
Like, let's be real. Who's been guilty of doing this in the past?
So really what we're trying to get across here is that when you're communicating, and it's especially important in these creative environments such as GTF or in areas like classrooms, is that you need to be able to create these relationships with your peers so that you can properly communicate your ideas. And this is particularly important in the creative making process.
It's also important when, like you saw us in our intro, that we're looking at each other, not looking at the ground, because that communicates dynamics to when we start and end a piece.
You are a wonderful player, and I want to know it. So if you're just standing there like a beautiful Grecian statue, I can't tell how good you are at playing the violin or the cello or whatever you do. I just tell that you're lovely and beautiful, not that you can really get into a moment and communicate well with each other when you're playing.
So communication is so important for GTF because it's the basis for everything we do. Since we're all students and we're always working together to make our own music, we always need to be able to communicate. And that really ties into everything else we're going to be talking about today.
Is there any questions?
Okay. Have you shared any of these ideas with other people that you play with at your schools? Have you communicated with them?
So he asked if we've brought this into our own schools, and honestly, I personally haven't, but I think it's something that all teachers should start doing. Because in orchestra, it's very different than the process we do here. The teacher just gives out music, and basically you do what's on the page, and your instructions are mostly coming from the conductor. But it's really, really important to work well within a section, because that's going to improve all of your playing and make you more of an ensemble instead of a bunch of different players that are just sitting playing music.
You know how every single orchestra director says, breathe with the concert master when you're about to come in, everyone's got a cue together. And like, basically all orchestra directors say this to their students because it does help them play better together. It really does make their sound more cohesive. So yeah, we kind of do that anyways, but really we're only mostly doing the non-verbal type of communication and the no instruments type of communication in GTF here. Anyone else?
I noticed that during the opener, some of the people weren't looking at each other. So how do you communicate to them, hey, you need to, sorry, I mean me. How do you communicate to that person, hey, you need to look at the group more?
It's mostly implied. I feel like, well, I'm known for being kind of aggressive when it comes to like communicating with other people in terms of eye contact. So what really works to get someone feeling okay is just like to stare at them really uncomfortably until they laugh at you, because like, come on, that's funny. And so, yeah, I feel like that's a good way, just when you're in the middle of a performance. But in general, it would be more implied, I would say. Like, oh, hello there. I love your beautiful eyes. It would be a shame to not see them more often.
It is something that we do consistently need to work on, but it's something that it is important.
We're still students, we're all fallible, but it's a constant work in progress to improve for all of us.
comment. I'm just really impressed that you spent as much time as you have commenting on these things that you've done. Thank you. That's good. That had to have taken a little bit of practice itself.
And we'll take one more question in the back over there.
So fundamental attribution error is wonderful jargon. How do you say that to your friends?
Stop blaming stuff. Stop blaming people for stuff you do yourself. Stop being a hypocrite.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you guys for listening to our communication portion. And next, our friends from comping are going to come up and turn it
I'm sorry, I forgot about this part. Are the two of you gonna do a little intro also? Iman or Reed and or Ruth, talking about fiddling?
Okay. Well, basically what they were going to talk about is a little bit about fiddling, which most of you have kind of heard a little bit about that, and just how fiddle tunes happen in an A, in a B section, or even a C section. And it's, when you play a fiddle tune, it's mainly the melody and the accompaniment, and we are going to be discussing the accompaniment. They were also going to talk about why we like to fiddle as high schoolers and teenagers. It's something to do with our friends, and we love making music together, and it's just a lot of fun. So,
I'm Britton. I'm a senior at Kemper Ready.
I'm Claire. I'm a sophomore at Mountain View.
I'm Aubrey. I'm a sophomore at Basha.
I'm Kat. I'm a senior at Mesquite. And so, like Aubrey said, we today are going to be talking about comping. Comping is what most of the rest of the world knows communication. No. Accompaniment. So comping is typically what you hear fiddle players or bluegrass players refer to accompaniment as. And it's everything that is not the melody. There's melody, and then there's comping.
So comping is different from accompaniment in classical music because it is often not as melodic. There's percussive elements, and it's basically improvisation, unless it's very strictly arranged in a jam session or even in an arrangement. You're kind of making it up as you go and listening and seeing what sounds best. So we're going to be talking about chord voicings, shuffling and grooves, chopping, and the interpersonal aspect of comping.
So before we can really get into the rest, we have to look at our kind of basic idea that we use while our comping, and that would be chords. So with chords, our way that we like to do it is to play, at least on violin and viola, it differs for cello, we play the first and the fifth, avoiding the third, because we don't want to have confusions with majors or minors, unless we do want to do that. But we usually do it in our lowest voicing. So for example, if we were doing the A chord, we do A on an E, or A G string, and E on the D string. However, like I said with the lowest voicing, if I was doing a D chord, I would instead do A on the G string and then A open D. However, with cello, that varies.
Yeah, it's just a little bit different. You want the root of the chord to be on the bottom voicing. So for D and anything on the C string, that would be fine. But for the A chord, instead of doing E and A like this, you would take it up so that the E is on your D string instead, because it ends up sounding muddy when it's with the melody.
Just avoiding all that inversion troubles.
Yes.
Okay, so for fiddling music is dancing music. So the groove is important in it, and also you use chords within shuffling. Okay, so when you're shuffling, it's basically subdivisions of the eighth notes according to the time signature. So this is a 3-3-2 shuffle, and this is one of the most used shuffles in fiddle music. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. My bow is always moving, but I accent certain bow strokes. The bow strokes that aren't being voiced are called ghost bows, and the offbeats are usually more voiced within fiddle music.
So in the Gilbertown Fiddlers, we love to chop. But Guys, you may have heard this term before or seen someone do it, but what really is the chop? We'll show you. Claire's going to play the melody of a tune called Angela and the Baker, and I'm going to chop. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the chop is a percussive sound that fiddlers like to add to their accompaniments, and it mimics the sound of a hi-hat and a drum set, and it's typically played on the offbeat. So it's especially helpful when you're playing in a band or at a jam that doesn't have a drum or rhythm guitar to do that offbeat. And while it's not necessary to accompany someone, it's a great tool to vary the sound of your arrangement or jam. And so there are 3 main rules to playing the chop, and Claire is going to help me show them to you. The first one is to use the bottom 2 inches of your bow. Perfect. And the second is to tilt the bow, the stick of the bow, towards your face. Great. And this will be weird for violinists because usually you're tilting it away from your face, but cellists it will be normal. And finally, the chop is an out bow and an in bow, not a down bow and an up bow. Perfect. So don't be disheartened if you can't get it right away. There's a lot of YouTube tutorials and things like that on the internet that you can watch. And when you practice it with a metronome. Also, you can add shuffles like I was doing when we played Angela and the Baker with it, and just explore all of those grooves. And finally, don't worry about messing up your bow at all, or your strings or your bridge. If you're doing the chop correctly, you won't break any bow hairs. I've never seen anyone break any bow hairs or anything like that. So, you're all good, and that is the chop.
So, my role today in our comping presentation is talking about more of the interpersonal aspect of comping. And what that means is communication, basically. Without restating everything the communication group said earlier, you have to be aware. You have to be aware that you are supporting the melody. You are there to make the melody sound good. So some of the ways that we can do that are through eye contact and through movement, especially. When you move, you groove. Like you saw Aubrey and Claire doing earlier, they were both moving while they were playing Angela and the Baker to try to communicate with each other what kind of vibe they were going for, or what exactly they wanted to sound like. Cueing is also important. It's important to make a big nod and a sniff before you come in, especially before big downbeats or really big sections that everybody comes in together.
Okay, and so on to our final point. Just kind of addressing that, as we mentioned before, with accompaniment, it isn't just referring to shuffling and chopping and chords. It can also be used in different ways, which includes just the idea of kind of harmony, which as our string teachers would know about our harmony are already going into it. However, there's also drones just are holding out our chords, and you'll hear a very prime example of that in our closer that we'll be playing later. And just any ideas of something that isn't necessarily the melody, but that does not inherently mean that it is non-melodic.
Yes. So in this portion of the session, we talked about chord voicings, shuffling and grooves, chopping, and the interpersonal role in comping. Do you guys have any questions?
How long does it take to learn the chop, typically, would you say?
How long did it take you guys?
To have it at some state of kind of consistency, I think a year, but that's only because I didn't consistently practice it until my second year of really doing it.
I don't know, it just
It's kind of a thing where you have to sit there and do it over and over again, and sometimes you wake up and you can just do it, and that it just happens.
For for me personally, I was taught it my first year at string play, and we were given a demonstration and then told, hey, go do that for 5 or 10 minutes. And so I did, and I could consistently chop on the offbeats, but I couldn't do any of those fancy chord chop patterns that you heard Audrey doing earlier, but I'm getting better at it.
Anything else?
How do you know what chords to play?
Well, with chords, usually a fiddle tune, at least as we know them, the chords are already written out. However, if you're looking to find the chords, you can look at the notes that are within the melody and you can see what chords they follow, as in every chord consists of the root of it, the third of it, and the fifth of it. So if the notes that fall on the downbeats of the melody tend to land on one of these 3 notes, you can determine which chord it is trying to voice, and then you can play that chord underneath, and then it should theoretically sound good.
And the more you play fiddle music and listen to people playing, you'll be able to hear it and kind of be able to figure out which chords are in the song.
I have a question about the shuffle. You did kind of a slow-mo version of it. Can we hear like just like how a normal shuffle sounds? Like on tempo?
Yeah, do you want to play in
Yeah. I think I'm gonna look closer.
Why do cellists and violin players always play right-handed? I mean, isn't it difficult if you're right-handed?
The reason actually is because in an orchestral setting, we're all sitting next to each other. So when we do that, I've seen a couple left-handed violins, and it basically throws off the whole entire orchestra, because now your instrument is in somebody else's space and their bow is going into your instrument. So instead of kind of making a left-handed instrument, which they do, but basically it's only employed for people who actually have a physical disability in which they are required. However, it's not that people who are left-handed and prefer it, they still might get it, but it's more typical for it just to have the same consistency so that we don't have our problem hitting each other in orchestra.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm Joseph and I play the violin. I'm Preston and I play the violin.
I'm Jacob and I play the viola.
We're talking about improvising. So for those of you that don't know what improvising is, it is creating and playing music on the spot. And we use improvising in GTF a lot. We use it all the time actually in our arrangements and when we're jamming on solos and when we're jamming together. And when you're improvising, like, it can be pretty scary to start out, but it's best to start small, start in a group setting like a jam. And so for those of you that don't know what a jam is, it is when a group of people get together to play tunes. And you play whatever you want. You play the melody or the chords or whatever just like makes most musical sense. And yeah, so Jacob will talk about.
Okay. So some tips and tricks when you're learning how to improv. A good place to start is with the pentatonic scale, which is a note consisting of a scale consisting of 5 different notes, and you can try to experiment with different patterns in there, just playing them over and over again. When you're individually practicing in improv, you can go through patterns and figure out things that you like, and then another way to get better at improv is you can put on a drone and kind of experiment with the notes and the key signature that you're playing in. And when you're playing in a group, it's your turn to take a solo, you want to start on the tonic, the median, and the dominant of your key when you start your improv. And then it's also important to get inspiration from other people who have done solos. It's good to take some of their ideas and implement it into your own personal style. And also varying the melody is helpful, because if you're playing a certain song and you're taking a solo in that song, you can basically make your solo sound kind of like the same style of the melody by taking the same patterns of that melody and maybe changing the rhythm of it, keeping the same notes, or changing the notes but keeping the same rhythm.
When you're practicing improvising, it's important to know there are no wrong notes. You can literally play whatever you want, and it's your own solo. And one thing that I like to do when I'm practicing is put on a drone, and this will help you make sure you're staying in the same key. It's like if you were in the key of G major, put on a G drone, then you'd stay in that key and play only notes in that key. And then this will help keep you, it keeps you in that key, and then it'll help you keep from playing notes with lots of dissonance. And those are notes that sound kind of bad, maybe, but not to jazz musicians. Another thing I like to do is I like to learn other people's solos. So like if I heard a solo on like the radio and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool, I could go home and then I'd listen to it a bunch, then learn it, and I'd take little licks, which are basically like musical quotes from their melody, and then put it in my own solo to make it sound cooler.
Okay, so when you're starting improv, when I was talking about getting an inspiration for it, it's important to have an idea of where your improv is going. So when you're playing a solo, you don't want to just play random notes. You want to try to tell a story with those notes that you're playing. And a good way to do this is you can think of a certain animal that you're trying to play, or you can think of a certain story that you're trying to tell about that animal, or even like a story that you made up or something. You can convey that through your solo, and when you're practicing at home, you can use that too. And then also when you're doing that in a group, it's just important to try to tell a story with let's say you're doing improvising, so that it sounds more musical and less random.
Sweet. So we're going to demonstrate how to have a jam and how to improvise on it. So we'll play the tune, and then we'll all take solos on it, and I'll just change up the notes a little bit. I'm gonna play the melody with fewer notes in my solo.
I will just try to play some different patterns within a pentatonic scale.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Any questions?
Jacob, do you prefer to use an animal? Can you give us an example or elaborate on what you mean by using an animal?
So when you want to tell a story of an animal, like if you, let's say someone says if you're trying to tell a story of an elephant or something, an elephant is usually big, it's loud, it's very powerful. You could try to take those characteristics of an elephant and apply those to your solo. So you want your solo to be louder and more triumphant, I guess, if that's how you see an elephant.
Show us.
Sort of. Like you use your eye contact to pass the solo to the next person. Like when Joseph was done soloing, he looked at me, and then I knew it was my turn. Then I looked at him.
Use like verbal and like non-verbal communication too. You can like before you start playing, you can plan everything out. You can also just like looking at people, like he said, and like directing your motions to them.
Does it ever turn out the same, or is it just different every time?
It can be different every time, but yeah.
A lot of the time when it's like, it will be different a lot of the time, because improv is on the spot, so when you're practicing, you will find your own style, because it's kind of like a self-discovery thing, because everyone is going to be different. So the things that you play, I guess I could say like maybe like mixing and matching. Like you're going to play different patterns that might sound the same, but when you put them all together, like those same patterns, you might put them together and it will sound different. That makes sense.
Does your mood play a role when you're improvising?
Yes, at least for me it does. Like if I'm upset, then usually my mind will be like more clouded and stuff, and it'll like my stuff will be darker, better. But if I'm like in a better mood, it'll be faster, that kind of stuff.
I'm gonna put Jacob on the spot. Jacob, could you take your elephant lip and you turn it into a wasp for us? Sorry.
So maybe this is a dumb question, but do you practice improvising on your own?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Tarantula.
Any other questions?
Tarantula, elephant, and wasp all in one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm Rachel.
I'm Jacob.
And we are going to be talking about arranging, which will incorporate ideas from all of the groups we presented before. But first of all, what is arranging and why do we do it?
Arranging is when a band or any group gets together and decides who is going to play what when during the tune. As stated before, tunes typically have A sections and B sections. So it's kind of just deciding like, Olivia's going to play melody here while I talk and Jacob does chords or whatever you want to do. The purpose of arranging is to make more planned creative decisions that might not happen otherwise in more of a jam setting. And the best thing about arranging is that no two groups will arrange a tune the same way. So each person's arrangement will have different ideas that they come up with, and it won't sound the same as someone else's arrangement.
Doing an arrangement may seem like a big task, but we're going to walk you through it by doing a mock arrangement. And doing an arrangement can be compared to eating at a restaurant, so we're going to be using this analogy throughout the presentation.
So first, we need to pick what restaurant we go to, or choose a tune. There are many different tunes to choose from, and all of them offer different styles and vibes. For example, some tunes may be Scottish, Irish, Canadian, or old-time American, and the vibe of your arrangement may be something like energetic and lively, or calm and cool, or maybe some adjectives like happy or sad. We're going to be using Angeline the Baker, which you heard the groups before us play, and to give you an idea of our process, we're going to arrange the intro, and then we're going to have some volunteers from the audience help us arrange an A section. Alright, so starting with our intro, here is our appetizer menu. So up here we have some different choices that are basically like the basics that we go straight to when we're talking about our intro. Of course, you're not limited to these ideas when you arrange, these are just some of our favorites. So, what do you guys think we should choose? Well, first let's describe all of the ideas. Oh, that's good too. So you can drone, so like the chord, the comping group is talking about, it's just playing the chord, holding it out. You can quote the melody, so maybe you'll play like half of a B section just to introduce the tune. You can shuffle chords, which the comping group talked about, chop, or you don't even have to do an intro if you don't want to. You can just jump straight into the tune. So now what do you guys want to pick? I think we should start off by shuffling chords.
I think we should quote the melody. Okay. So, in GTF, we try out everyone's ideas, and some ideas that may sound strange or bad at first can end up being some of the best when we get to the end of the tune. And we call this the GTF democracy.
At this stage, you apply a lot of the rules that the communication group was talking about, so everyone can be heard. Alright, so our two ideas are, let's try having everyone shuffle chords. Okay, let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I think everyone should play the end of the B section.
Let's try that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So now that we've tried out both of our ideas, we're going to vote on which one we like better. Okay. Who likes the first one? The second one? Okay, let's choose that. Alright.
Okay. So next up we have our main course, or our melody. So these options are a high melody, a low melody, or an improv. So, but we wouldn't usually start an arrangement on improv because you want to establish the tune first and like how it sounds.
So since there's not many options, we're just gonna have you guys vote on which one we should do. Ray, please raise your hand if you'd like us to start on a high melody. Sure. Low melody? And improv.
The melody wins.
Alright, let's low melody wins, so Jacob will keep doing. Alright. Alright, our side menu is comping. So we can chop chords, we can shuffle chords, drone, or play harmony. Can we have two people from the audience suggest two ideas that we can do? One idea each. One idea each. Yes. Drone. Okay, anyone else?
Shuffle chords.
Shuffle chords. Alright, let's try each one. Drone and then shuffle chords. Let's drum first. 1, 2, happening, go. Okay, let's try shuffle. 1, 2, 3. For the sake of time, we're just going to be choosing an ending. But the choices, some of the basic choices that we use are an abrupt ending, which would just mean ending on a faster note, slowing gradually down until the end, revisiting the intro, or holding the final part. We're just going to choose holding the final part. Alright, shall we play the game? Let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Went pretty quickly because we had all the ideas that we wanted. But when we arrange in GTF, it can take up to maybe a couple of months of rehearsals. Because in GTF, we don't spend all rehearsal, arranging. That depends on how complex the arrangement is, though. Our most complex ones are the opener and closer because they include everyone. But we also have smaller arranging groups that typically don't take as long to arrange. And now that you know the basics of how to arrange, you can go back and apply these in your classrooms and in your music communities.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
What's the longest arrangement you've ever had?
Time-wise, or how long it took?
Time-wise.
Okay.
And how long it took you to decide?
Our opener and closer probably about 5-ish minutes.
Yeah.
And those took us 3 months to arrange.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you remember what you arranged from a previous week to the next week?
So in GTF we have these sheets called tune sheets, and it's just a bunch of boxes. So you write section A, and then write what you're gonna play, and then B, and write what you're gonna play. So everyone has their own individual papers that you can reference until you memorize what you're gonna play.
We also a lot of times record specific spots if there's a more complicated thing that you're not sure you're gonna remember.
How do you decide who's going to play what?
So when you propose an idea, you decide who's going to play it within the group at that moment, and then after that you can adjust. So if you decide that there's too many people on melody, some people might move to the bottom, and it's kind of your decision.
Do you always use fiddle tunes, or can you arrange different genres?
It's a great question. You can arrange anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, some of us are doing pop tune groups right now, so we're arranging those, and we can change those up or do whatever with them that we want.
Could you arrange something for, say, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star?
Yeah, you could.
Could you do it now?
Alright, anything else? Alright, thank you guys.
Okay, while they're getting ready, do you have any other final questions? Anything that you are really wanting to know before you leave?
How big is our audience going to be?
We're not exactly sure, but we are thinking maybe around 50. It depends on, because there are multiple sessions that happen at a time, it also depends on what staff at the same time there. Because if there's another really popular one, then we might lose a lot of people. If there are ones that are maybe less popular or don't interest as many people, then we might have one less session. Yeah?
Will you only present one time, or will it be multiple times?
We'll present one time. We're also working with the Siderio booth to be doing some, kind of workshop and demonstration things in the exhibit hall. So they'll be playing elsewhere, but one big session.
Are they gonna play up the jam that Taylor's doing?
Yes, and then there's a jam on both nights of the first 2 nights of I guess it would be really Thursday, Friday. On those 2 nights, there are jam sessions, and Taylor is gonna be leading one of those, and these students will still be in town for that, so they're coming to the jam too. And the next night, they're all flying home because many of them are taking all-state auditions the next day. Okay, they've got one more tune for you today.
Okay, next up we are playing our closer. It consists of 2 tunes. The first one is called 50-Pound Cashback, and it is a Scottish whistle tune, pipe tune. Okay, the second one is a Scottish whistle tune, and it is called Superfly.
1, 2, 3, 4.
for sharing them with us. Also, thank you to Discovery. We love being rehearsed in this space. And we actually have some refreshments out here provided by Ray Bedarsic. So thank you so much. Please have some cookies and some cake. Before we cut into the cake though, if you guys would maybe just set your instruments down and come out to it so we can get a picture of you guys in front of it. Because it's an ASTA, what does it say again?
GTF ASTA.
GTF ASTA, yes. Thank you so much for coming.